Our story begins in 1929, when the serial killer Raman Raghav was born in a village in Tamil Nadu, India. He did not receive any kind of education, and his father was an unemployed man who supported the family by stealing, which he taught his son at a young age. The latter loved and was very attached to him, while he did not have any kind of respect for his brothers or even his mother. This is because the traditional village societies in India, due to illiteracy, encourage contempt for women. In his early youth, they arranged for him to be married to his eldest niece Jaranama, who in turn did not love him and did not want to marry him. So how did he become the biggest serial killer in India? Before we start the story, do not forget to like and subscribe. After his marriage, Raman soon followed in his father's footsteps in idleness and professional thievery, and barely provided for his wife, always subjecting her to severe beatings. Then, Raman was imprisoned shortly after the marriage, in a theft case. When he was released, he discovered that his wife had died while giving birth to a child from another man. Once again, they arranged for him to marry another girl. He soon discovered that this girl was in love with another man who left her after she gave birth to a young child from him, and lived in the house of a woman who was the one who sent him his expenses. Raman felt a bitter feeling that mixed between anger and being deceived, and then decided to leave the village and its people, and travel to Mumbai. Raman Raghav began learning the craft of weaving and began working in a textile factory. He rented a room in a husband and wife's apartment in Mumbai. He soon made the man his friend, until the fateful day came, which toppled his relatively stable life when his friend's wife expressed her desire to have a relationship with him. Of course, he refused out of loyalty and love for his friend, and went to sleep, not knowing that the next morning he would find himself in the position of the treacherous friend, as the wife falsely accused him of trying to assault her, and the husband believed her. He suddenly found himself friendless and homeless. In fact, the bitterness of the injustice that befell him, which was like wormwood in his throat, and the loss of his friend, meant nothing to Raman, but the fact that his friend believed the woman and the man lied to him, was the catastrophe of catastrophes for a person who was raised to believe that a woman's word has no value in the presence of men, and all she has to do is pull her veil to cover her face and just listen. And when her husband dies, she must be burned with him, because her existence is no longer of any use, meaning that women have no purpose other than serving men and fulfilling their sexual needs. But since the government began to allow them and encourage them to go out and work, their voices became louder, and they aimed to turn men into homosexuals. This idea almost drove him crazy, from its insistence on his mind, to the point that he began to avoid temples, since the Lord chose Durga to be among the goddesses. In 1964, Raman began to think seriously about saving himself and others from turning into effeminate or homosexuals. He began to think about targeting the poor and homeless who take shelter from the streets. How could he not, as they would be the first target of the government in the conversion, and they are the most vulnerable group with their bent backs exposed to the nakedness. While he was wandering around looking for his first prey, he found a small hut with a door tied with a rope. He looked through it. He found a woman sleeping next to her husband and their young child. He took out a pair of scissors, cut the rope that closed the door, and sneaked inside. He stared at them for a few minutes, casting his shadow over them like a nightmare, then attacked the man with a thick stick. The latter woke up from the heat of the blows, and his wife and their young son woke up with him. He tried desperately to defend himself against Raman's blows until a stream of blood began to flow profusely from his face. Meanwhile, his wife pulled her young son and hugged him while screaming loudly for someone to come and help them, but no one heard her. Raman finished killing the man, then turned his gaze towards the mother and her child, and began beating them until he left them lifeless corpses swimming in a pool of blood in their small hut and ran away. He felt elated when he returned covered in blood, determined to repeat the incident repeatedly, so the killings began to happen one after the other, and the method was almost the same. He would surprise the unlucky homeless person sleeping at night with a sharp and fatal blow, and sometimes he would repeat the blows until he crushed the head. The vast majority of the victims were poor people who slept on the sidewalk. The murders increased dramatically in the eastern part of the city during the period from 1965 to 1966. During that period, the killer attacked 19 people, 9 of whom died from serious injuries. The police started to act after people and the press started to pressure them because of their fear of this serial killer. To the extent that about 2,000 policemen were patrolling the streets every day at night. They arrested many people, including Raman Raghav, who was roaming the streets and did not give a convincing reason for his evening walks when a policeman asked him. When he went to the police station, the police confronted him with his multiple thefts, but due to lack of evidence, he was released with the rest of the suspects because they could not link the thefts to the murders. After the police failed miserably to stop the killer and reveal his identity, people started to let their imaginations run wild and fabricate stories about his identity. For example, some said that he had magical powers, thanks to which he could take the form of any animal he wanted at any time, so after smashing his victim's head, he would turn into an animal and crawl back to the forest, where he would regain his human form again, while others claimed to have seen him sleeping on a tree in Ari colony. Thus, Raman felt that he had become invisible, and that God was pleased with his actions. On the other hand, the Mumbai police appointed a young and talented police officer named Ramakant Kulkarni as the Mumbai crime branch officer. He took a look at all the files, and with steely determination, he was determined to find their man. He started thinking about an environmental criminology theory, called crime geometry. This theory states that after a criminal commits a crime in a known area, the criminal can go far away and commit another crime at the same time. Working on this theory, the police were asked to keep a special watch on Malad, Goregaon and Jogeshwari areas. The criminals' fingerprints from one area were cross-linked with those taken from recent crime scenes in the area. They were right in their theory. Crime started spreading in Chincholi Malad area. 3 years later, on August 27, 1968, Alex Vihalu, a sub-inspector of the crime branch, was roaming in an area in South Mumbai. He had stopped to wait for the bus that had stopped in front of him to get off a man wearing shorts and a long blue shirt. He immediately felt uncomfortable with him, so he let the bus pass without getting on it and started following him. He noticed that he had a wet umbrella in his hand. It had not rained that day. He decided to question him about it. He told him that he had come from Chincholi, Malad. It had rained. He held his breath as soon as he heard the name Malad. Most of the murders had happened in the same area. He also noticed a metal ring on his finger like the ones tailors wear while sewing, so that the needle does not prick their fingers. It reminded him of a tailor who had been killed in Malad. Fialo's suspicions increased even more. He took him to the police station, and his fingerprints were examined. They were found to be identical to those found at the crime scene a few days earlier. He was sure that this was the same person who had committed the murder. The man's name was Raman Raghav, and along with him were found spectacles, 2 combs, a pair of scissors, an incense holder, soap, garlic, tea leaves, and a piece of paper with mathematical symbols written on it. Other than that, the police did not have much information about him. That he kept his mouth tightly shut, and the police's attempts to make him talk, whether by pressuring him or even by beating him, failed. Here, the police officer Kulkarni decided to follow another method to make him talk. He started talking to him gently. Then he asked him if he wanted anything. He immediately replied, "I want chicken curry." Once his request was granted, the police officer asked him again, "Do you want anything else?" This time he replied that he wanted a prostitute. When the police officer replied that this was not allowed, he asked for things like coconut oil, a comb, and a mirror. They brought him everything he asked for and gave them to him. He opened the oil bottle, and massaged his entire body with it. Then he combed his hair, and kept looking at himself in the mirror for some time, forgetting the policemen surrounding him. After that, he agreed to tell the police his story. He told the police the address of the place where he had hidden his weapons. The police found some knives, rods, and some sharp weapons there. He said that he killed more than 41 people, including his sister who had recently moved to Mumbai, whom he raped and killed. When asked why he did all this, he said that he was born on earth to be a representative of the law and the master of another world, and that everyone was trying to change his gender, and he kept repeating that he was 101% male. He suffered from symptoms of mental illness, such as sex obsession and hatred towards women. He confessed to committing 41 murders, but the police believed that he had committed more murders. In these cases, the government lawyer demanded the death penalty. However, the court declared him mentally ill after he underwent a mental examination, and it was proven that he was suffering from schizophrenia. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and sent to Raida jail in Pune, where he began undergoing treatment at the Central Institute of Mental Health and Research. While in jail, the barber accidentally cut off part of Raghav's mustache, so he ran to kill him. He didn't talk to anyone for 7 days, and kept saying, "I don't want to look like a woman." Later, he offered the authorities a 1-year bail, and gave him a woman in exchange for not killing anyone. His conditions were that the woman should be under 30 years old, and she could also be a prostitute, because he was only interested in physical relations. In 1995, Raman Raghav died of kidney disease in Sassoon Hospital. In 2016, a Hindi film inspired by Raman's life was produced, titled Raman Raghav. Here we have reached the end of the story. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to like and subscribe.